Not going to lie, I was a little skeptical before meeting my guest today. Well, maybe nervous is a better word. I did keep asking her if she would tell me if she saw a ghost standing behind me. Grace Newell is a clairvoyant medium, akashic records practitioner, and intuitive guide. Sound confusing? Well, don't worry, I asked her to explain it all in a language we can understand. Her story of how she knew this was her gift and why she had to use it to help others is one you have to hear to believe. Grace shares why she was reluctant to tell anyone and how growing up in the church shaped her mindset about psychics. This topic was really out of my expertise and comfort zone, so I appreciated how open Grace was and patient with all of my questions. She is like an actual ball of sunshine when she walks into the room, so I would encourage you to watch this episode if you're able. Her energy is contagious. If you've ever been curious about this topic, I think you're going to love this episode. So without further ado, here's my conversation with Grace Newell. Okay, well, welcome to the podcast. I have Grace Newell here today, and I have been so excited to have you on. And I've kind of been talking about you saying, like, you're just like, I had not met you before, but I visioned you to kind of just be this like ball of energy when you walked in the door, and you were indeed. So I'm glad you could be here in person.
Thank you so much for having me on.
Okay, you are, and I'm going to read it because I want to make sure I get it right.
Okay.
A clairvoyant medium, akashic records practitioner, and intuitive guide.
Yes.
Did I say that right?
You said it correct. It was
Perfect.
awesome.
Okay. So I started following you on Instagram. We were just discussing this a while back. And you kind of like were just doing a bunch of stuff like influencer-wise on Instagram and all of that. And then you had a very big change in your life, which led you to do what you're doing today.
Yes.
I listened to the story because I listened to you to tell it on your podcast and was just like, so intrigued. I was like, she's got to come on the podcast and share this, because I feel like a lot of people either like have heard of what you do or they know somebody that knows somebody, but I think hearing it directly from you, and you also tell it in such a like beautiful and organic way that I'm just glad that you're here. So I don't know if you want to start with what happened on the plane.
Yeah.
Is that where you kind of like to start?
Yeah, I can start from the top, because typically people will hear Akashic Records and like, what is that? Like Shannon always jokes, that's how we got connected.
Yes.
Shannon is one of my best friends. She's like, it's giving Jumanji, it's giving like Ouija board. Okay, like, what are we talking about?
Why don't you explain what Akashic Records are before we start?
Okay, so
before the plane.
Akashic Records, I always say Akashic Records, aka angel readings. It's connecting with a very high vibrational consciousness, which every single person that's listening, whether or not you're aware of it, we have received this, and I guess information or frequency. It's when you're just existing, going about your life, and you're in the shower or you're doing something and you get like this like random great idea.
Okay.
That's when we're just like getting this idea come into our brain. That's whatever people believe, placed on your heart by God or universe, or it's an energy, or you're manifesting. To me, it's all the same languaging. So anytime we get any of this information, it feels like something that we're very excited about, like starting a new venture, starting a new project. And so I have the ability to connect with that energy and help people I essentially always say I specialize in soul's purpose, because so many people are walking around being like, what am I doing here?
Yeah.
I hate my life.
Right.
I hate my job. And I don't want to live this way.
Why am I here? Yes.
Right. And I know that because I've been there. And I think that's why my story is so interesting, because I spent the first many years of my 20s being an atheist. I didn't believe in anything. I didn't believe in God or religion or universe or nothing. I was like, I thought it was just kind of a bunch of hoopla.
Yeah.
I remember people talking about it to me and I was like, whatever. Like they would talk about like, oh, my grandfather passed away and sent me a sign. I'm like, did he?
Right. Were you raised in the church like when you were little, or
Yes.
no? You were. Okay.
Yeah. So I was raised in a very, I would say, pretty strict Catholic environment my entire life.
You were like Catholic school?
Yes. Okay. All girls Catholic private school. And my family was fortunately not super strict. My mom was. My mom was one of 10. I have 40 cousins.
Yes.
Very
so you're
traditional
a
Catholic family. And my dad was an environmental scientist. And so he always did bring in this very interesting curiosity about the world and how energy works and the quantum field, quantum physics. But he never really, he just kind of let me be.
Yeah.
Both of my parents, I feel, let me be. But I still was really absorbing the religious programming and ideas that psychics and mediums are bad and this is wrong and don't ever do that being in Catholic school my whole life. So I spent my whole life being like, I would never go there. They're going to steal my money.
Kind of like a scary thing almost.
Yeah. Or like almost like swindler vibes.
Swindlers,
like I was going to be like robbed or something. I don't know. And I always joke now, I'm like, I don't know what psychic hurt me because I didn't know any.
I think a lot of it comes from like TV, movies, like online, they get a very bad.
Yeah. And then kind of going, like the religious piece was like, we don't want to go there because it's like, you know, and I can kind of get into that. Obviously, it's been a very kind of pivotal shift, a massive life rebrand because the joke's on me.
It is like a rebrand of your life.
Oh, my whole entire life. Oh. So essentially to bring you guys into the airplane story, which was the moment of my life that changed everything and changed my whole entire career, every aspect. How old were you? So it was the very pivotal age before you turn 25. So I always want to tell people before that brain is nice and solid. So it was a few months before. So I was 24.
Okay.
And at this point in my life, when I hate to throw it back this far, but I was very intuitive as a child.
Okay.
Like, I think I've always seen spirits, but it was very normal to me. You don't know as a child that it's no one else is not seeing that too. And I was very intuitive. I was always in my own la la land world. I was a terrible student. I was also I was just a rebellious kid. I was always pushing the limits.
Right.
I went to a very strict school, and the teachers were like, "Oh, we love Anna Grace. She's great, but she really isn't ever paying attention. She's like out the window." I mean, I was just in my own realm. We don't know.
Yeah.
And I learned that I was like super highly sensitive, intuitive, all the things, which a lot of kids are. And so the teacher's like, well, here's the thing. We can put her, we can give her this recommendation, go see a child psychologist. My parents, just being the parents that were wanting to help me, ended up saying, well, we can put her on medication.
Okay.
And so by the time I was 14 all throughout high school, I started off, I'm like 110 pounds, 60 milligrams of Vyvanse because
what's that for?
Vyvanse is like Adderall. Okay. It's a focus, but it's at the end of the day, it's a stimulant.
Yeah.
It speeds up your heart rate.
Right.
Also, I've done a lot of other drugs and they oddly feel quite similar.
To the Adderall?
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's some form of meth almost.
Yeah.
So, and I'm a little bitty squirt. And they just said that I was very, like I did all the tests. They're like, oh, she's really ADD, ADHD or whatever. I don't know how they scale it. I don't know. But I was high on they're like, we're going to give her a lot of something out of the chute. By the time I was in college, I had like 3 prescriptions of like Vyvanse, Adderall. Like I could take up to like 120 milligrams a day, which is a lot.
Did it help you?
I mean, well, yeah, but I was like cracked out of my mind. I mean, yeah, I'm like, I love algebra because I'm like,
you're now like a whiz kid.
Yeah. And you know what I did? I graduated with a 4.2.
What? You graduated with a 4.2? Wow.
Because you're just like, but you're so hyper focused on like doing work. It's like doing cocaine.
Did you ever sleep?
No,
you were awake.
Oh my gosh, I was
studying.
Alert. I was studying. I was reading,
doing homework.
I wasn't at lunch. I was like in the library, being like, I'm gonna finish all my homework, so after school I can go to cheer practice and whatever. Which that brings in a whole other wave. It's like you start taking speed, essentially, was what it was. And I was taking a lot. There are some people who are on a low dose and that works for them and that's great. For me, it didn't work for me. Okay. And then I'm on a competitive cheer team doing gymnastics, all the thing. And I started losing a lot of weight because I'm literally have no appetite at all.
Yeah.
And that's when I started getting really praised. Like, oh, you look so good. And as a teenage girl, getting all of this.
It's like the kiss of death.
It is it.
Straight to an eating disorder.
Oh, in order to be liked, accepted, valued, I am not going to eat.
Yeah.
Eating is bad. We're not
and
eating
also,
anymore.
what did I look like before? I must have looked terrible.
Right. Yeah. For all of this compliment and praise. And I'm like, okay, well, noted. So then it was like, I liked it even more because I'm like, oh, this is great. I can take this. I'm not hungry. And so that really followed me into college. And that's where things got really dangerous because I'm a rebel kid. I've always been that way. Rules don't apply to me. I was just a bad girl, bad Catholic school girl. and that was the other thing too. I always tell people about like even being in a religious environment. Like I always wanted to believe in God. I was like, I love that people have, like, I think that's so beautiful and I want to feel that way, but I just couldn't
get there.
It just didn't make sense. I'm very logical in some ways, which is funny that I've ended up in a very non-logical career path, but I thought it was beautiful. It was never like I was like always an atheist and hate it. It wasn't until I was in college where I was like so disconnected from myself, so deep in an eating disorder, like never eating, then going out on the weekends and like getting drunk and then like, like binge eating pizza in the middle of the night. Cause all of a sudden I realized, am I allowed to cuss on this?
I mean, I think I have to beep it out because it's clean,
my gosh,
but
sorry.
I don't know.
Holy moly.
Yeah.
I'm like, I'm starving. I'm starving because I haven't eaten all week, and then it started this really unhealthy yo-yo because I didn't have that in high school. I had structure and routine and, you have whatever. So by the time I go to college, you're drinking, and it was just adding in all these other levels of just the worst, like self-loathing, being so hard on myself, starting to gain weight, being like, oh my gosh, my taking all of these stimulants isn't working anymore, drinking, partying. It just like started getting into like a really negative
and like
situation.
catching up to you, basically.
Yeah. It started catching up with me. And this is still kind of my early 20s. And that was when I remember I did some type of like religious theology study class in college. I can't remember what the official class terms are in there, but it was something like that. And I was learning about all the different types of religions. And I remember being so annoyed that there was so much just discord and war and people fight over, I'm this, your way is wrong, my way is right. And people we're killing people.
Right.
I just remember being like,
there wasn't a peace about it.
No. Yeah. And I remember like, if God is real, he doesn't want us killing everyone. And so from that moment on, I said, I'm an atheist. I don't believe in anything. I don't believe that that is the world that we live in.
Yeah.
I was and also I grew up in my little bubble. And then when I started seeing outside the bubble, I was like, this is not making sense.
Where were you
to me.
living? Had you left?
Yeah, I was going to school. I went to the University of Arkansas.
Okay.
And so, but still, it was definitely like more of a religious environment, but I was just on my own. Yeah. I wasn't in Catholic school because in Catholic school, we went to mass, twice a week. So I was just being like, this is just not adding up. This isn't making sense. So then I'm like, I'm an atheist. And at this point, I'm just it is like, my view was so narrow. Like I was just like, what are we doing here? Why are we here? Why am I alive? Like the thoughts in my head were just so negative. There was just not a lot of positivity. But what's interesting is on the outside, people were like, oh, she's such a positive, friendly person. But
you were still all of this, like back.
I mean, I was. I think now this is more authentic.
Yeah.
Then I was sort of putting on a performance that people thought I was okay, because on the inside, if you have any type of disorder or addiction or eating disorder, it's just a very selfish, you can't stop thinking about what you're going to eat, what you're going to do, how you're going to work out.
Like it's consuming.
Yeah, it's very consuming. Yeah. And so I just couldn't see anything outside of my world. And then also not having any faith or anything, I was like, whatever. It was a mess. So in college, I remember I did have one moment where I broke down and I was like, I'm so over this. Like, I'm so over hating myself. And always, it was just such a war going on inside of me constantly. And I remember I cried and I laid in the bathtub and I said, if there is a God and I can figure out my way through this, I swear to you, God, Jesus, sweet baby Jesus, anybody that's listening, I will tell everyone. I will literally tell anyone that will listen to me. Like, I just remember making that promise, being like, I will help anybody because this is just terrible.
Yeah. You're like, send me a sign.
Yeah. Like, and I didn't even know about signs then. Like, I was just like, if anyone is even listening, like, I will do something with this, but like, there's got to be, get me to the other side. Okay. So 2 years later is when at this point, I'm out of college. I'm working in fashion. I decide, I'm like, I'm going to be a fashion influencer because I was working in retail in college. Yeah. I was on the marketing side sending clothing to fashion influencers. Yeah. I was like, cool, I want to do that. Well, then it only gets me into a more toxic mindset where I'm like, I'm going to work more. And in order to be successful in fashion, you need to be skinny. So the eating disorder stuff I feel was at its worst because I just felt really out of control then. And I'm partying, I'm smoking, I'm drinking, I'm like taking all this Adderall. And then at night to go to sleep, I'm like, I need to take an edible or I need something to come down or I need to drink a glass of wine. Like you're just riding this
you just can't get off.
Oh my God. Yeah. It was just so... And also I was working so hard. I've always been very driven. So it was like I was working really hard, but I was just trying so hard to medicate whatever situation was going on inside of me. And also that's all I'd ever been shown or taught or, doctors are like, take this in order to be successful. And I was like, okay, sure. And then
you have to take something else to
like relax. Yeah. To relax. And so I always tell people, it's not so much that I identify as someone that's like, I was a drug addict. It wasn't like that because first of all, I had a prescription. I wasn't sourcing things. Yeah, like maybe taking edibles and all that stuff. I'm not encouraging at all. Yeah. But it was still just so disconnected from myself. There was like no awareness of what I was even putting in my body or how I was existing. Yeah. Like I did not even think about it.
It's like just to numb everything, right? Which is what I think alcohol, drugs, all that does anyway. It's just to numb what you're actually feeling.
Oh, 100%. I was the definition of just numb emotionally on the inside and intuitively. But I always did. I loved fashion. I loved the work that I was in. And I was like, I know I'm supposed to have a platform. Like there was always these little tiny seedlings of knowing, even from like a very young age. But at this point, I was just so far over here. And that's when the universe is like, well, we're going to have to course correct.
Yeah.
And at this point, I was going out to an event and I was a micro influencer. I had a small following. I'm really bad with numbers and timelines. Every time I tell a story, I always try to guess. But I think I had something around like 10 or 15,000 followers, which at the time was like, for being in Memphis.
Yeah, it was a big deal.
I was like recognized. Yeah. I was a fashion editor of the magazine and I was doing a lot of cool, whatever jobs, working for Free People and had somewhat of a following. And I remember I woke up one day, I was flying out to Los Angeles and I had been on a super bender of like the week of like, I was working, full-time on my blog, Instagram, all of that, but also working a full-time job. And I was doing the most. Yeah. I was like, just doing the most. And
like overachiever at her best.
Yes, but almost in a way of like, when there's some level of overachieving, it really is also another form of disassociating. Yeah. You can't sit still with yourself for one moment. You have to constantly be working. And when you're working at a rate like that, you're just spinning your wheels. Yeah. You're not really you're not actually moving the needle.
Right.
You're just like on a hamster wheel. Yeah. And that's kind of how I felt. And I get on this plane. It was an early 6 a.m. flight. And I had been in like drinking coffee, taking 5 ants, like real in-depth flow that week. Cause I remember it was like a fashion related event. So I was like, I'm gonna be super snatched. Like, oh. And here's the thing, like also at that point, like none of that was even working anymore because it was like my body was so
but
like—
But you didn't know what else to do.
No. Yeah. My body was so inflamed and pissed and like, I just didn't know what else to do.
Because it gets to a point where it stops working, right?
Yeah. It kind of just
to
like—
the point.
Yeah. You're just like dull. Yeah. Like you're not as like cracked out feeling, but you're just like, But then you're like, well, I can't stop taking it. And also the doctor's like, you can take it forever. And I'm like, perfect.
Which is crazy.
I know. Yeah. Anyways, and I was drinking and partying and I was also in my 20s. Like I was just doing all the things. So anyways, I get on the flight. We're like, seriously, I think an hour and a half or 2 hours into this flight, I had fallen asleep because I had not taken anything that morning because it was a very, very early morning flight. And I put my head down on the tray table in front of me and I'm asleep. And I remember we hit some turbulence and I kind of like, you kind of like bump up and I like sat up and I all of a sudden was like, oh my gosh, my upper lip was sweating. My shins were sweating. My kneecaps were sweating. Like my weird parts of your body that don't like your arms are sweating.
Things aren't supposed to sweat.
Like not even like your armpits. But you're like, this is really weird. Like everything is sweating on my body. And I remember like it happens very quickly. There was a guy beside me who I'll never forget. He looks like he was like a train conductor wearing like overalls and like a hat and beard. And I remember I woke him up and I was like, I need you to call help. Something is like so wrong with me and I'm so scared right now. Like it was like I just knew something.
Like what did you think, you were gonna have a heart attack or something?
Well, no, I didn't know at the time. I always describe it to people as I felt like I was going to, I hate to be graphic, but I felt like I was gonna poop my pants or like projectile vomit. Okay. When you're like, oh my God. Yeah. Oh my God. Something
like
is
a shift in your body.
Something is like about to come out of my body in a really forceful way. Like, I don't know what's happening, but
give me some help.
That urgency where you're like, oof, something is like escalating quickly and it's not right inside of my body. And I, wake up this guy and it was funny because I actually had an acquaintance that was going to the event, like same event, who was sitting on the row down from me, like in the middle seat. And so she's on the flight, but everyone's asleep because it's at 6 a.m. Early, the lights are out, the early morning flight vibe. And so he calls for the flight attendant. And I remember at this point, it's getting worse. Like my hearing is now gone. My vision was starting to get black on the outside. And I'm going blind. Like at this point, and at this point, you're just like,
terrified. Because you're in an airplane. It's not like you can get to a hospital.
And I'm alone. Like I don't have family. I know there's like one random girl, but she's asleep. And she didn't know anything about—
the conductor next to you.
Yeah, the conductor. And I am like, oh my gosh, something is about to come out of my body. And little do I know at this point, so the flight attendant brings me a cup of orange juice. It's like, oh, we'll get her some juice. Right. I'm like, you're so far past a cup of juice.
Like I'm not having a diabetic episode.
No, yes. I'm like, and I just remembered, like, this is where I remembered reaching for this juice. And at this point, like my motor skills, like I couldn't hold it. It was like I was like going, like I spilt it on myself. And I just, from there very quickly, I was unconscious. And all of that moment, it was like the most intense crack. I always tell people, like, I've never given birth, but I would almost imagine the amount of pressure
inside.
that women say when you give birth is like what I was, pressure. But it was
like in your chest?
Yes. Like, but it was me coming out of my body. It wasn't like vomit. It wasn't anything. It was like me. Like I literally felt my body, myself, like pop out of my body. And then from there, I'm like, I went from being so terrified. I can't even, like, sometimes when I tell a story, I cry because it makes me really sad.
You like relive it.
Yeah. Well, I'm just so sad because I was so lost and like scared. I didn't know what was going on. And, you know, my family's like so far away. And then I'm all of a sudden like, oh my God, I am so like experiencing the most like euphoric sensation of like peace and calm.
In your body?
In my, well, I'm not in the body anymore.
Okay, you don't feel like you're in your, you're not aware that you're not in your body.
I'm like hovering over my body and I totally am aware of it. And I'm totally okay with it. And keep in mind, before this, I don't believe in any of this stuff.
Right.
So I'm like, well, this is different. You know, like, I think at the time I just went from being like, oh my gosh, like, I understand now this like overwhelming feeling of love. That's what people are saying is like God or universe or source or whatever word you're using.
Something other than earthly.
Something other than earthly. Because
so it was like a true out-of-body experience.
True out-of-body experience. When people are saying like, I have an out-of-body experience, I'm like.
Could you, like, do you remember, were you looking at yourself or you just knew you were not in your actual body?
Yes. Like I knew I was like hovering, because I always tell people like, whenever you get into the near-death experience territory, you know, you have people that go on like a whole journey. They like go to heaven and back. I didn't go to the gates of heaven. I was not taken to like a man with a white beard and a cane. Like it wasn't like that. But I was seeing in front of me like these two like very bright, like jellyfish orb being in front of me, like just like very light figures. And I just knew. It was so weird because I went from someone that so did not believe in this at all. But I immediately knew what it was.
What was it?
They were angels. They were angels.
But they didn't look like a traditional
not
angel.
Like wings.
Like,
No, it was like a light being. Like I don't know how else to describe it other than like like just.
Did you feel like you knew them, or they were just, you knew they were angels, or you felt like you knew who they were?
I think I did. It was like I knew they were going to be there. And what's interesting is I'm having this experience and I'm like so calm. I'm so like, I feel this overwhelming amount of love. I'm getting this information essentially, like I'm having this I don't know if this angelic information or just this God spirit energy that I all of a sudden, it's like, I just know. Like I look back and I'm like, you did this to yourself. Nobody did this to you. Like I was like victim mentality just all the time. Like I just thought like, I just felt so helpless. Like there was no way I could take control of my life. I just thought this was my life and it is what it is. And that was the first time, like that was the biggest shift that I'm like, you did this to yourself.
Like
no one like forced you to take pills or like do anything. Like you got yourself into this mess. You're going to get yourself out of this mess.
So in that moment, that's what you were feeling?
Yes. Like it was almost like oh my God, I did this to myself. Like, and I think a lot of people don't realize that a lot of the stuff they're in.
You can say it. You can just say it.
My language is so inappropriate. A lot of the stuff that they're in that they hate about their lives, I'm like, I hate to tell you, and it's a tough pill to swallow, but you got yourself in. You walked right into that mess. And then it becomes familiar and comfortable and normal. And then they don't know how to get out. And then you live your whole life in this mess. And then you die. You get to the end of your life,
and then you die.
Which was where I was. And I was like looking back at all of these moments and I'm like, oh my gosh, I have no one to blame but me. And this is not my life. And this is not what I'm here to do at all. But it was like, I'm so grateful for that.
Did you think you were dying in that moment? Like, did you have a feeling on that?
I don't know. I don't know.
You didn't really know.
I didn't really know. I don't think like now I could like look back and tell you my hindsight is 2020 view and be like, well, of course you were. Of course you were on the brink of death. But in your head, you're like, you don't think you're that bad off. You're like, oh, I'm kind of like, okay. My health
But you weren't scared.
No. No. I was so not scared in that phase, being with this like light. It was just like a light. Light being is the only way I can say it. in this presence. And it was like I was receiving information. Like, I don't know. It was just this knowing. I just knew. I knew that because in my head, I'm thinking, I don't want to go back there. And I almost feel like I was trying to communicate. Like, oh my gosh.
Like to yourself, communicate to yourself?
Yeah, but it was almost like we were in this like telepathic conversation, which I know is hard to, but it wasn't like I was talking with words. Right. I was just like an energy, seeing myself and being like, I don't want to, I can breathe. I feel like love up here. I don't want to go back into that. It was so hard. And
you feel like you made a choice though to stay or to go back?
No, and that was the thing. It was like I was like, I don't really know if I want to go back now that I've experienced this. Like, I don't want to go back.
You felt that in the moment.
Yes, and that was information. It was like, well, you have to go back because this is what you signed up for. Like, you didn't come here to just do that.
Yeah, right.
That's
now you're done.
Right, like it's done. Like, we whispered, and now we've got to shout because like you missed all the flags,
right?
All the turns. You went 100 miles that way. And unfortunately, this is, here. But I think that experience was unavoidable. I was always going to have some form of a near-death experience, whether it was
Do you know how long you were out for?
This is the interesting part. I would say 15 to 20 seconds. And
oh, wow. Not long.
Oh, yeah.
Wow.
But if you think about
what did it feel like? How long did it feel like?
30 minutes. A long time, but it was so weird. It was so weird that I could receive so much information that would literally change everything.
Like in light speed.
It was light speed.
Yeah.
And I really do believe that's what people mean, like light speed or God speed. It's like, it's real. And because time here is just, it's very human made up. It's not like God was like, you guys will eat lunch at noon every day. Like, we've kind of made up all those terms. Yeah. But I received like the information that I always like to tell people that is like the most encouraging is that, like, first of all, things that I learned was that nobody ever, ever, ever dies alone. No one dies alone. There was so many people during COVID that got sick and were in the hospital and you couldn't see your family and, whatever. And like, I'm like, no one was ever alone. There is always.
Meaning that like on the other side, they're not alone? Okay.
There is always like an ancestor, a grandfather, someone that is assigned to watch over you, to protect you, they guide you, to bring you to the other side. It is a beautiful experience. And that's another thing that's very interesting and weird about this story is that I spent a lot of my life having a lot of severe anxiety around dying, which is, I don't know if some weird premonition or just some random coincidence. I don't know. And my parents had me when they were 40. So they were just old, technically older parents out of my friends. And I would always get really upset. Like, I don't want you guys to die. And my parents were like,
we're not going to die.
We're like fine. We're like super healthy. But it was just this weird fear of death. It always.
You think you had that fear of death because you didn't have a peace about what was on the other side? Yeah.
Probably. And I just didn't understand it. And I think
which is the scariest part.
Right. You just don't know what's going to happen. And even having that, like, I am not scared to die at all.
Okay.
Like, I don't want to because I don't feel ready.
Yeah.
But I'm not afraid.
So when you were in your moment of with the lights or the orbs or the angels, do you remember, like, what was the last thing that, like, before you came back, whatever you would call it, like, what was that last thing? Like, was it just a knowing of I still have more to do, or did you just come back?
Okay, so I definitely got, like, I always say, I don't like the word conditions. I got to come up with a better word. Like,
terms?
3 terms of which I was to return. It was kind of like, you're going back.
Right. like, did you hear words? Like, these are the things I'm like, the details. I'm like, did you actually, because people say, well, God spoke to me. I'm like audibly, or you just knew it in your, like, did you hear someone saying that, or you just knew?
I just knew.
Okay. Yeah.
I didn't hear, it wasn't like, Anna Grace, you're going to go back. Here's like a scroll was
Here's
read
your
to
list.
me.
Yeah.
No, I just like knew I knew everything. Yeah. And it's kind of like if sometimes someone asks you a question or you have like an intuitive ping and you're like, I don't know how I knew that, but like, I knew he was cheating on me.
Yeah.
It's like that. You're just like, I just knew. But I did have like obviously more specific information. And like I had a couple of things that I was shown that were like important to, I guess even for me, I like walked around my whole life, or not my whole life, but my more formative years, being like, I don't believe in God. This is real. And then I get like basically struck by lightning. No,
in a plane.
Yeah, in a plane. But I really was seeing how it worked. And I saw this like massive energetic grid around our entire planet. And that was the thing that I always tell people. It's like as if we were a tree, but we were all leaves on this tree. Like we were all so much more connected energetically than I ever realized. And that was something that was so profound, because I realized like, if I'm so fixated on hating this person and poisoning their well, I'm poisoning my own well. Like, we are going to expend so much energy treating people a certain type of way.
Yeah.
We're treating ourselves that way.
You're basically doing it to yourself.
Right. Like we are actually inflicting pain on ourselves when we are doing this to other people. And that's something that has really shifted how I show up and interact with everybody on a very, very massive scale. But I realized nobody dies alone, that we're all energetically connected. And I saw that visual and I was like, that's very interesting. And then the sort of terms that I was seeing was like, one, that I was going to have a child. Like I had to come back because I was going to have a child that was going to do something significant. And I was like, okay. At this point, I'm like single. I'm just like,
you're like, wait, baby was not on my radar. Okay.
Yeah. I'm like, feels like a big term. I was going to write a book. That I was like, which is still.
You definitely could do that.
Yeah.
I feel like that it could be in the works.
Yeah, it could be in the works, coming down the pipeline. I've got a pretty strong idea, and I was going to teach something. I had a message that millions of people were going to hear, and I was going to teach them. Like specifically, that was the thing I needed to teach people. And I just remembered at the time, which is funny because I just had no clue. I didn't even know the word spirituality.
Right.
Nothing. I'm like, me?
And it always had like a negative connotation.
In my world.
Yeah.
So I just remember like, yes, I knew that information. I received it coming back into my body, which that was the part where obviously I'm on the airplane. I remember there was a woman in front of me. Sometimes I forget this part of the story, but there was a woman in front of me that was holding my hand and you could tell she was, and it was another thing. Like, I don't even know how I knew this, but like, I knew she was like a mom and she had sons. Like I just knew this about her. And it was like a mom instinct thing. Like she knew how scared I was. She was in front of me and she turned around and she was like holding my hand and she was like, I said a prayer for you. And I just remember being like, I believe you. Like because when people used to say that before, I was always like, kind of turned off by it. Yeah. Like I was like, I just remember I was just like,
this was when you came back?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Coming back into my like body and just being like,
I mean, you know that the conductor beside you was just like, what did I sign up for? I was going to sleep on this early morning flight. And now I'm like.
I know.
And the air stewardess was probably just like, oh my gosh, it's too early in my shift for this.
Oh, everybody. Yeah. But, I think too, what is interesting, and that was even a part of the knowing, was that I knew I was going to be fine. Medically, the doctors were like, you probably had a heart attack.
Really?
It makes sense. Because
so when you come back, wake up.
Right.
What are you thinking when, like, you've opened your eyes and now you are back? Like you were in just like the most amazing, beautiful space. And now you're back in this like tube and this of air with your orange juice spilled all over you. And you're like, no. I didn't want to be back here.
I remember it was a very overwhelming experience because I just remember, and this is what also makes me sad, is I remember being like, no one's ever going to believe me. Like, I remember being like,
yes.
Oh no. Like
Did you feel like you just wanted to write it all down really, really quickly?
Yes. But also, I don't even know if I quite had that awareness now that I do now. Cause now I'm like, I write everything down and I have my journal and all things. But I just remember being like, what? But also being like, no one's ever going to believe me. Like, how am I ever going to teach people? Like, how am I going to tell anyone this? But that was my own, judgment leading
how
up.
you had viewed people.
Yeah, how I viewed people. I thought people like that were crazy. I was like, well, just
so did the medics come on the plane? Was it a whole thing?
No, because we're midair. We have 2 more hours till we land. And
how did you spend the next 2 hours?
I
just
don't
shocked?
Honestly, I don't really remember. I don't. And that's the thing that's hard. Every time I tell the story, I swear I remember like a different part or piece or angle or whatever, because it was like a very crazy experience. And I remember my friend on the plane, I remember she said, you turned gray. And I'm like, yeah, something really profound happened to me. Like I was just like, but I knew I was going to be okay was the interesting thing. I wasn't scared. I wasn't like, oh no, whatever. But I had the immediate knowing, like, and that's what people always say, like, how did you go from that to what I am now? Right. Because it's like a complete.
Yeah. Like in the next day, 3, 4, 5 days, what are the things that are like happening in your body or your mind?
Well, the first thing, which is interesting, which I actually don't advise people, because I got to say, this is not medical advice. This is my story.
I feel like you're going to tell me you quit Adderall.
I did.
Yeah.
It was like it was immediately
You're like it's got to go.
I was like repulsed. I'm like, I can't, which that's the thing too. I always tell people, I'm like, I know it's divine intervention because I was so dependent. I don't like to say addicted because it's not that I don't think I could have.
Dependent's a good word.
Mentally thinking, the only doctors have told me my whole life that you have to be on this medication. And I was like, okie dokie.
Yeah.
Like I was just like, pill, take, eat. Yeah, this is my life. And so I knew I had this overwhelming feeling. I was like, everything, we're done. We are so done. And that was jarring because I realized I'm about to be 25 years old, which is technically, an adult, and I have no eating patterns. I don't know how to take care of my body at all. I don't even know how to work without being medicated.
Yeah.
I felt like I was starting over completely, which is also sort of an overwhelming place to be because you're like, what? Also, I just want to be like, what have I been doing?
Yeah.
Like
what's my purpose?
Yeah, also that. And then getting this really big purpose, which is interesting because my dad always told me when I was like 7, I told my dad, I was like, Dad, I'm going to be on stage. I'm going to help a lot of people and I'm going to come back and I'm going to take care of you. My dad's like, you're like 7. What are you even talking about? Like I think there was always these glimmers where I knew.
Yeah, that you knew. Did you tell your parents when you got off the plane?
Well, so no.
You didn't?
I didn't tell my parents, mostly because one, I knew my mom was going to have a come apart.
Yes.
She was going to freak out. She was going to like airlift me somewhere because that's what my mom is. And I love her.
Yeah.
And then there was another part of me that I'm like, the story is so jarring. And also it's far out.
Right.
And my
Did you need time to process it too?
Yes.
Like, were you trying to make sense of it?
Yeah, it took me honestly a long time to process. I mean, months.
Okay.
I mean, I told my family, I'm like, listen, something really happened to me.
Are you like, I feel like I'd be Googling like how are you getting information about to try to make sense of it?
I remembered I started listening to podcasts.
Okay.
And what's funny? I mean, like I said, I'm 30 now. So it's been almost, I guess, is it 6 years?
Yeah.
Math, Yeah. So it's been a while. So I can't remember exactly what I was like doing. But like I said, I think the comfortable part was that I just like was kind of like, I've got to get my shit together, stuff together. I've got to get it together.
Yeah.
That was the thing. It was like, I kind of went into like mode where I'm like, we're done with the Adderall. We're cleaning it up. We're like, this is not my life.
Yeah.
It's almost like I had this glimmer of the life that I was supposed to live. And I'm like, oh my God, it's real. It exists. I can do this.
You felt how it could feel to feel great.
Yes. Yeah. And I wanted that. Yeah. So then and keep in mind at that point, I didn't know anything about spirituality. Akashic records, like nada. I was a 0 on the scale. I wasn't even like curious.
Okay.
I was asleep.
Okay.
And so I remembered someone gave me a book recommendation. It was The Universe Has Your Back by Gabrielle Bernstein. Okay. Are you familiar or ever heard of it? It's just a really great starting place for anybody that's just open to anything. Mm-hmm. Like you don't have to be religious or spiritual. It's just kind of information. Yeah. Like this is her life story and how things have worked out. And once I read that book, it was like, I guess the universe was just sending me like all of these people and resources and things because I listened to every podcast. I sort of became obsessed with near-death experiences for a while, which I actually don't recommend because, but it was so like comforting to know that someone else had experienced something like I have. There's actually podcasts solely dedicated to people that have near-death experiences. And the weirdest part is that what I explained, a lot of people explained very similar situations or in certain words of seeing the imagery that I saw. So I was like, okay, this is real. I'm not crazy. Because I think there were moments where I'm like, am I losing my mind?
Yeah, well, and probably you had never heard anybody in your real life talk about that before.
Right. Because I think when I started feeling like, oh my gosh, what's going on is when I started dreaming things and seeing things. And that's when it was like, I got off of the Adderall and that was what was blocking me because it makes you very numb. Your creativity is really stifled by any type of, anything.
What are you dreaming about?
Like I would just start dreaming about like my grandmother and then like she was like coming to visit me in my room at night and like telling me things. And then I was like dreaming that I would run into someone and I would wake up the next day and walk out the door and like run into them. And I'm like, that's weird. Like just weird things started happening because I realized that the last 10 years of my life, I've completely blocked any connection to myself, my knowing, my intuition. And then all of a sudden when I started cleaning up my act, I wasn't perfect. I wasn't right now I don't drink or do anything, but there was a process.
Okay.
But getting off the Adderall was huge. It was all of a sudden like it opened up this like
like a pop in your brain.
Yes.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden I'm like, oh, okay. So this is weird. I'm dreaming things. I'm seeing things. I'm not really sure what's going on. And at the time, so I moved to Nashville in this transition period because I've had, I broke up with my boyfriend. I move. I'm just like going through every massive transition because I'm like, I know this is not my life and I'm taking control of my life. That was just my mentality. Like I'm figuring out, like I remember hiring a trainer and being like, I need a meal plan because I don't even know how to eat. I don't even.
But you were like a go-getter.
Yeah, I was. And I always have been, which is crazy that I got myself into such a weird predicament before. But I was like, I can do this. Like, I know I can. And I know it's what's meant for me. And so I kind of go through this hiring, getting a nutritionist, just trying to get my life together. And I was working in Nashville as a wardrobe stylist at the time. And I remember there was someone on set talking about this guy who is a celebrity medium. And that was the first time that that languaging started coming into me. And I remember being like, and also anybody listening, like all of these celebrities have a whole entire spiritual council. They don't talk about it though, because I guess it's controversial or whatever. Like the biggest stars, because then I was in the room with them. I'm like, I know they are all seeking guidance from whatever it is for them, like astrology or, some type of spiritual energy person to help them forecast with their business, which is essentially what I do for people now. But I didn't know that at the time. I remember everyone was like, oh yeah, there's this guy we all go see in the city. And I remember being like, I want to go see that guy. I remember being so intrigued. And I went and I met with him. And I just remember he was telling me, he was like, well, you're supposed to do what I'm doing. And I was like, really? Like, there's no way. Like, doing readings for people?
Because
like,
did you feel it at that point?
Yeah. And I was like, that's where I was like dreaming things and seeing things and like starting to really connect. And I just remember being, I guess, confused because I didn't have any language around it. So I'm like, is everyone feeling this way? Is it just me? I just wanted to talk to someone. And I remember he was the one that was like, no, I mean, this is what you're here to do. And I was like, interesting. Me being the logical person, I'm like, I booked like 2 other psychic readings. I'm like, I want to see if they all tell me the same thing. I'm like, I'm going to take notes. I'm going to test them. I'm going to blind test them. Because I
see if I'm really supposed to do this.
Yeah, because I was just so intrigued because I just didn't realize that, we have that capability. Even though I've had such a profound experience, I still think that I was just so curious, I think is the answer. And I was still I was wrestling with this logical part of me. It's like, I've had this experience, but how does this integrate into my life? And pretty much everyone told me the same thing. Okay. So I'm like, well, okay. So that's interesting. So what are you going to ask? Sorry. Did I interrupt you?
No.
Oh, I thought you were opening your mouth. Okay,
no,
sorry.
No.
I'll start again. But anyways, so I see a couple of people. They start teaching me about these other modalities. And it was like, from there, it was just kind of like a breadcrumb. I didn't jump from having dreams to doing
When you say modality, what do you mean by that?
So there are all different types of ways that you can connect. Like, and a lot of people are always like, oh, I don't know. I don't want to like see ghosts or spirits or anything. And I'm like, here's the thing. If you're existing right now as you are, and you are not seeing anything, you're not going to wake up one day and like be conjuring and seeing all these things.
Okay. So you're not just going to wake up one day and
spontaneously.
Grandma Susan is now with you.
You're not going to be overwhelmed because I think that's been the biggest thing for me to debunk with people is that they're really scared of the work because it doesn't make sense to them. They don't understand it. And they're like, I don't want to see anything. That sounds terrifying. And I understand because I've been that person. So I relate 100%. But I always tell people that's like saying you're going to go to the gym once and get buff. It's not, you're not going to open a portal that you can't close. I think people have this weird connotation that, you're going to tap into something you don't want to. You're going to open Pandora's box, or it doesn't really work like that. Like, we are always protected. We're never going to be in some scary, overwhelming spiritual situation that we can't handle. I am actively doing the work every single day to connect to people's energy, to see things, to read things. And it's a practice.
So when you say you're connecting to people's energy, do you mean like if you and I are sitting here, you're looking to connect to my energy or someone who's already in the spiritual world's energy? Whose energy are you connecting?
So I can connect with both. And there are people who specialize in that, going back to your question on modalities. So there are certain people who are just what you call clairvoyant or have a clair, which, spoiler alert, every single person listening, every single person in this room has some type of psychic ability or a clairaudient hearing, claircognizant knowing, gut feelings. It's your intuition.
What clairvoyant is.
Clair is just, and then clair and one of your senses. So clairvoyant is seeing, right? Clairaudient, so both of those, I can see and I can hear, but it hasn't always been that way because I've practiced and trained to get to that point. So people listening you're not going to be.
So you trained to get. But it was seated in you. Like there was something there.
Yes. And that's how it is for everyone. That's why the work that I do, I'm so dedicated because I believe I specifically speak to women. I'm sure there's a couple kings on my podcast, maybe listen, but because I believe that women are such powerful, intuitive beings. We have to be for the sake of evolution, for having children, for the foresight. Men are more like protect and like provide.
Yeah.
That's kind of their like natural go-to. But like women, we are so intuitive.
Yes.
In order to protect our, like, you know before they're going to do something or get into trouble. Like, you know, with your kids, you have a feeling. And that's planted inside of all of us. And the more that we listen, like our intuition it's planted inside of us like a seed, every single person. I always tell people, I'm not like a superhuman special person. But the more that we can fine tune that skill set, the more that we listen and act on it, we're going to start to flex that muscle.
Okay.
And we start to trust and we start to connect, and it starts getting louder because we feel more comfortable hearing it. And we know that's our intuition. And so for me, yes, I can connect with just someone's energy. Yes, if they have loved ones, I will invite their loved ones in, but it is always on my terms.
Okay.
I don't walk around wanting to connect with random spirits. I'm not interested.
Okay, so this is like a dumb question. Not a dumb question.
It's
but
not a dumb
just
question.
a question of someone who does not know. I mean, are you someone like, are you walking down the street, or you're walking in here, or you're walking into a restaurant? Are you seeing spirits, ghosts, people? Are you seeing those things?
Okay, so
You're like, yes, right behind you.
No.
I'm like, oh God, cut.
No, because it's terribly distracting.
I
And
bet it would be so distracting. I feel like there's was a movie about that where you're so distracted. You're like, not now. Oh gosh.
so I've had like very over, like, so when I first, so I have this person, like, you have this gift, and I'm starting to be like, this is all making sense now.
And how far past the plane incident are we by this point?
Maybe like a year. Because the first thing that I did was like the physical, like eat, stop taking drugs.
Change all that, yeah.
Right. You know, like it was very physical.
Right.
And then I kind of slowly started recognizing that I have some type of spiritual gift. And I'm really curious. I'm just like learning. I'm listening to a lot of podcasts. I'm just like in this phase where I'm like just really curious and super open-minded. And never thinking it was going to become a career path. And at the time, at this point, like I had grown a following. I think at this point, by the time I moved to Nashville, I don't know, I have like 40 or 50,000 followers over kind of this course of this year. And I'm not telling anyone.
Yeah.
I'm just like going about my business, being a fashion girly, trying to just
Not telling anyone because you thought no one would believe you or they wouldn't understand.
I was afraid of being burned at the stake.
Yeah.
I mean, you know,
Right.
that's the sort of messaging I grew up around, that this was a gift, or no, this was not a gift.
It was a curse.
Or
some sort of like witchcraft.
Yeah, totally. And that I was going to be, excommunicated from society, or that my followers were going to be like, we're not following you for this. We don't want to hear about your spiritual journey.
Right.
We want to follow you for fashion.
Yeah.
Link the top, zip it,
Swipe up.
Yeah, swipe up. Like I was just like, I just didn't feel comfortable sharing it. And also there was a lot of people ask like, well, I can't believe you waited as long as you did. And there is something so sacred when you have an experience like that is like truly a holy experience.
Yeah.
And then you tell someone and they're like, oh, or they just don't get it, or they don't believe you, or not even they don't believe you, but they're just like, oh, that's a crazy story. And you're just like, it's just so like, you take
it takes all the meaning away from
Yeah,
it.
it's such a beautiful situation. And then, but then, obviously fast forward, I was completely wrong, because when I did share the story, which was the podcast that I released. Is
that when you shared the story, was starting a podcast?
Yeah, starting a podcast, my first episode.
Okay, so you started a podcast called AG University.
Yeah, AG University.
And your first episode,
Yes.
you told the story.
Yes.
And what you now had and what you were doing. And you had never said this before.
Like publicly.
Publicly, okay,
publicly.
What did people think you were releasing a podcast?
I have no idea.
Okay. They just were like, we like her. We'll tune in. We'll see what she's going to say.
Oh, totally. I said, buckle up.
I was going to say, buckle up. Yes. I mean, did you kind of release it and then
Yes.
go,
I
I don't want to read anything? Or were you like relieved and just like, it's out there?
I was just like, I cannot pretend to be anyone other than I am anymore, because at this point I'm running a full underground operation.
Right.
I went from being a celebrity stylist
Yeah.
to one client coming to me saying, something's kind of going on. And then, slowly getting into energy work, slowly doing readings, word of mouth. I have a wait list. I'm telling no one. I'm also an influencer. I'm doing fashion. I'm over here. I'm over there. And I'm not telling anyone. I'm also not advertising business, but it's picking up momentum.
Okay.
And I ended up moving to Florida. So like a year and a half ago is when I moved to Florida.
You got engaged.
I did get engaged.
You met a boy.
I met a man.
You met a man.
And when we moved to Florida, it was a breaking point, because I also wasn't working in the fashion here like I was. I wasn't going to events. I wasn't getting dressed up every day. I was also so burnt out on doing fashion content because I had done it for so many years. I was like, I can't talk about this anymore. And I remember just laying on the couch being like, I'm so like, I don't care. I don't even want to.
Like it didn't excite you.
No, I was so burnt out. I was so over it. And I had an agent, a management at this time, and had well over 100,000 followers. And I'm like, I can't do it, y'all. And they're like, can you try? Could you like
just a little?
Maybe could you just do a little something? And I'm like,
had you brought it to their like the people like management and that? Did you bring it to them as a suggestion?
Oh no,
okay.
Not really. And I think
did they know about the podcast?
No.
Oh, okay. So just everyone found out the same day.
I told pretty much no
Your
one.
mom and dad?
At this point, my mom and dad, my mom and dad were always just kind of like, oh, okay, great, neat. Like we support you.
Okay.
But they weren't like.
They were being like a nice mom and dad.
Yeah, nice mom and dad. They weren't like super like feeling any type of way, like super strongly about any part of it. But they're just like, great, you've always been a go-getter. Get them, honey. And so I ended up meeting with a mentor. She's like, I really think you should start a podcast. I was like, okay. 1 week later, 7 days later, I had album art. I had everything ready. I recorded it.
You're just going for it.
I had a producer at the time. I was like, yes. And see, leading up to this for maybe a few months, I had a Patreon, which is where I started hinting. Like I was teaching people manifestation because that felt like a safe entry point for me.
On your social media?
Patreon, which is like it's like an educational OnlyFans. It's like not only, it's like a subscription, but it's like education.
For education.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah.
All right.
So it's like a subscription platform, but no one can access or view it.
So on the down low, you were teaching people
Yes.
that.
And I'm kind of like on my Instagram, like if you guys want to hear about like energy, and I'm being really like vague. I'm like energy stuff and, manifestation and feeling good and blah, 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 come to my Patreon. And then in my Patreon, I was starting to kind of allude that this is like what I've been doing, but it was still very vague. And I ended up closing the Patreon because of all the vagueness. I didn't even know what I was doing there. I'm like, why am I doing this? My friend was like, it's because you need to start a podcast. And I was like, oh. And I had been recording with one of my best friends for a while on a podcast. So I felt very comfortable on the microphone. And I said, okay, so I released this one episode. And I tell Austin, my fiance at the time, I'm like, I think I'm just going to do this. I'm going to put it out there just so I can get it out there and people will know. And it's like I'm coming clean. I'm coming out of this.
Like no face-to-face conversations. You just said it and now it's out there.
I've said it and they can take it or they can leave it. At this point, I have to because I'm so like, there was no life left in the work that I was doing. And so I posted it and I was so worried I was going to get negative feedback or whatever. The feedback was overwhelmingly positive. Wow. It was like the nicest.
Saying like, me too, or saying congratulations?
No, just saying like, wow, this story brought me so much comfort or peace around. I mean, I think there's a lot of people that have.
Around like dying?
Around dying. And also, a lot of the work that I teach, the whole fundamental core of AG University is helping women connect with their intuitive voice that we all have, whether you call it God or your intuition, your higher self. It doesn't matter. We all have it. Helping you reconnect with your intuition, which ultimately helps you reconnect with your soul's purpose. Because you're always being guided. Every point of your life is a breadcrumb to lead you to the next thing if you just listen.
Are there ways, like when you say work on your intuition, if like someone's just like driving to work right now and they're like, okay, I'll work on my intuition, like after I get off my, 8-9 hour shift job, like what are we doing in our daily lives that someone could actively, with intention, work on their intuition?
Okay. Yeah. So do you journal or do you have any type of practice?
I really want to journal. Okay. I do. And I love to write, but I don't love to write about myself.
Okay.
Well, I shouldn't say that. Like I'll say something for Instagram about myself. I don't like to write about my feelings. Okay. And that's probably a problem. Like that's probably another podcast. But yeah, like journaling is a good way.
Well, I felt like maybe you have some notes in front of you. You're a pretty good writer.
You're like a terrible subject. Yeah,
No. Everyone has an intuition. So I always tell people like, first things first, let's think of a time in our life where we had just like an overwhelming intuition about something. Okay. Everyone can come up with a story. Mine was like, I knew my boyfriend when I was 16 was cheating on me. I just knew it. But I couldn't prove it, but I knew it. Like, I always tell people, like, think of a time.
Okay.
Think of a time where you just felt like you knew something and you couldn't explain it. And then I want you to think about, like, did you feel like a tightness? Did you feel like anxious? Did you feel it in your like a pit in your stomach? Like what were you feeling, right? Like, just start to think of a time where you felt like you had a hunch about something. Because I always tell people, like, connect with an event. Think of a time. Even if you can't remember the time, like, try to close your eyes and visualize, like, this is a time I felt really, whatever, intuitive or connected to something. And I always tell people, like, there's a difference between Because a lot of times people are like, oh yeah, I have a lot of thoughts in my head. How do I know it's an intuitive thought versus, whatever, anxiety or fear or, if you have a random thought, am I about to get in a car crash? Is that my intuition or is that fear?
Right.
Whatever. And I always tell people the thing about your intuitive voice is that there's zero emotion attached to it. So if you ever have a thought that freaks you out or makes you anxious or uncomfortable or whatever, there's a charge there. That's not your intuition.
Okay.
That's your mind being a sneaky little tricker.
Okay.
That's not. So your intuitive voice is just going to be like a fast knowing.
Right. Without the emotion.
Without the emotion. It's not an emotionally charged because your intuition is always coming from a place of love. All those other anxiety, chatter. It's another thing. If there is a lot of chatter happening inside of your head, I was going to say your mouth, your head, there's a lot of chatter going on. So like some chatter would sound like, Anna Grace, you didn't work out yesterday, so you should really get up off the couch. Should, another huge word. You should really get up off the couch. You should do this. That's an inner critic.
Okay.
That is an inner critic. There's a lot of explaining going on. My intuitive voice is like rest.
Okay.
One word. Your intuition is queen, regal. Queens don't explain themselves. When there's chatter and you're trying to convince yourself in your head, that's not your intuition.
Okay.
That's coming from a place of needing to prove your worth or validation.
Right. Like if I feel scared to get on an airplane, I think that's my but no, you're like negotiating with yourself, but I'll be fine. I've taken 1 million flights. That's not truly your intuition.
Yeah, that's not your intuition.
Okay.
A lot of times we have intrusive thoughts. Like, what if I get on this airplane and die?
Right.
What if it crashes?
Yeah.
That's just an intrusive thought.
Okay.
That's an intrusive thought. Your intuition would never be like, okay, let's say for example, how about this hypothetical situation? You're headed to the airport and you are going to get on a plane and the plane is going to crash, right? But it's not your time to go. Your intuition or your higher self or the way that the universe works, you would get a flat tire.
Right.
You would, something else would happen.
Gotcha.
You're not going to just get like
it's not going to be you.
Well, I'm not saying that's the case, but a lot of the times I think we think something really scary is about to happen. It's just a fear.
It's a fear.
It's a fear that we have.
Okay.
And so our intuitive voice it's very calm. It's very gentle and it's very loving. That's the thing. Like your intuition is never going to be this negative self-talk that a lot of us how could you ever do that? Or how could you ever think that was possible for you? Or blah, 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 blah. Like so many people are like, I'm so afraid to share my gifts or I'm so afraid to show up on social media because I'm afraid that everyone's going to judge me.
Right.
Me, I was so afraid. I didn't want to tell the story because I didn't want to be burned at the stake. I didn't want people to ostracize me.
So you said the feedback was good after your first episode?
It was so positive.
Okay. So you didn't feel like you got a lot of judgment?
No.
And did you instantly put out a second episode?
Yes. And I literally, that's an example, is like I made that whole narrative up in my head.
Right.
My intuition all along was like, post it, share it, do it. I was like, no, I can't. They'll hate me.
Yeah.
They'll unfollow me. Also, if they do, whatever.
Right.
Now I'm at a place where I'm like, I don't care.
Yeah.
I don't care. Please.
Has it grown though? Like your social media and all that since?
Oh my gosh. Okay. So spoiler alert, guys, the podcast, it went immediately number 1 on Apple.
Yay.
So
I love that.
It immediately went number 1 and I remember looking in spirituality, and also it was like number 1 in spirituality, number 6 overall, and in like the top 5 in religion or something.
Wow.
I remember it was like Sadie Roberts and then me, and I'm like, oh my gosh, like.
Did you feel such validation, or did you need that to be validated? Were you going to be happy regardless?
I was just like proud of myself for doing it. But for me, I mean, I was definitely kind of shocked because I'm going, oh, wow. I wasn't 100% sure I was going to stick with this forever. Like I'm a podcaster now. That's now a part of my identity. But that to me was just validation. Okay. I'm like, oh, the universe is like, thank God you finally told this story. We've been trying to get you to do it forever. Right. And, that was almost, I really do feel like we are rewarded when we're brave. I really believe that. Like you are always, there is always a reward for bravery. And for me, that was something that was really brave, even though most people were like, great story, love it. And some people were like really deeply altered by the story. Or some people were like, you know what, I've also been an atheist most of my life. And this story has been the first thing that's made me question there's more for me. And even that is like huge.
So let me ask you, this kind of leads into this question I have. And I spoke about it a little bit. How does someone have a faith already? Or even let's say like someone's listening right now and they have a faith, whether it's a Christian faith or they're Jewish or they're Catholic, Muslim, another type of religion. Is it possible to marry a faith, whatever faith that you have, and spirituality into one? Can they exist within each other, or can only one be true?
Right. Great question. Yes, I absolutely believe that both. You can be religious and spiritual.
Okay.
I talk about this a lot on my podcast because obviously growing up in a religious background and having a lot of that. And also my fiance, I mean, we go to church every Sunday.
Okay.
Like I believe in Jesus.
Right.
You know, I think people think just because I do this work, they're like, are you Christian? I'm like, yes,
Right.
of course. I've been raised that way. Now I identify more now as a non-denominational. I see sort of a more all-encompassing belief system.
Yeah.
Whereas if you feel comfortable only talking to God, whereas some people feel like with the word universe, you know, because I don't ever want people to be turned off if they didn't grow up in the South.
You have like more of like a non-judgmental view of religion now? Okay.
Well, because I know we're all really trying to say the same thing. We're all trying to get to the same point. And I feel that, so growing up Catholic was really interesting because, you know, what I do in the Akashic Records angel readings, it's all in the Bible. The Akashic Records is noted, it's cited in the Bible. Anything with like the Book of Records.
Are Akashic Records, are you like an actual book? Okay.
No,
you don't have like
it's a very good
book.
question.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not a physical book. It is just, it's essentially in the realm of mediumship.
And did you train to do this or you just, okay, you trained.
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
you trained.
Yeah.
But not anybody could just train. Like I couldn't train.
You could.
I mean, I could, I just probably wouldn't be very good at it.
But you could. You never know.
I probably wouldn't.
You
be
never
very
know.
good.
You could be great at it.
So I know you have this like huge, now you have like this wait list of people wanting to, okay, so if you say you're going to do a reading for someone, do you mean a reading of their Akashic Records or do you mean a reading of like loved ones, or can it be anything that they want?
Typically, it's their Akashic Records because I specialize in soul's purpose, which is why in the beginning I was working with what I like to call high performers, CEOs or celebrities, people that are really wanting to know, like, why do I have this business? How can I optimize this? How can I be on purpose? Or, you know, or they feel called to service in some way. And maybe they're not necessarily spiritual, but they're a good person. You know, that's okay. You don't have to know all of these things. They're just drawn to the work because they're intrigued. So I will connect with their energetic code, I guess, or their energy field. And I'll always have the ability to see, essentially, like I can give them the kind of the next 3 steps, right? The next 3 steps, that's your highest timeline. I'm connecting with like your higher self, or what a lot of people have always loved to say, God's plan, right? There is a plan that is written for us that we have agreed to before we come into this body. That is our optimal thing. It's like if we were all waking up every single day being our best self, this is what we would achieve. So I'm going to tap into that timeline for you, and I'm going to show you this reality.
And is it a feeling? Like if I come to you and I'm like, okay, I would like you to read my Akashic Records because I want to know what the next 5 years of my life, I'm not asking you to do this right now, but if like next 5 years, is it have to be in person?
No.
Okay.
I actually don't meet with anyone in person.
Oh, what?
I do everything virtual. I live like in the middle of nowhere on the beach.
So, but seeing, do you need to see them? Or
no.
Just hear, you could just hear them?
Someone, I'll take you through the exact process. Someone would, either be on my wait list or book a session with me. They would get in with me. My assistant would send them a list of questions. They would get 3 to 5 questions that are what, why, how questions. I don't answer when, like, when am I going to get married? I don't do that type of work. But like, what is my purpose?
Right.
Why did this thing happen to me? What was I supposed to learn from it? How can I XYZ? Those are the types of questions that I am doing on like a true like soul level. So from there, I'll get their information. I have their name. Most of the time, I've never even seen this person in my life. I don't have a photo of them. They just come in through my newsletter. And then I do a 40-minute meditation before I meet with every single one of my clients. And then this is the part that people are always like shocked when they get on the Zoom call, because I typically will have already written 6 to 10 pages.
And this is what you've learned in your meditation?
Yes.
Okay.
Because I go into the Akashic Records, which is simply saying an opening prayer. So it's just a prayer that I'm going to connect with their higher self and their soul's purpose. And then from there, I will just script anywhere from 6 to 10 pages. It's long. My readings are long. My readings are expensive. I'm expensive.
Like how long is a reading with someone?
I mean, it's an hour and a half.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And also, I've given 10 pages will typically come through. And these are things that are like, just all across the map of like, this is what's holding you back. A lot of people will have like these crippling, limiting beliefs that oftentimes they don't have awareness around. So they're like, why can't I just do this thing? Like, I see myself doing this thing, but it's so frustrating. Like, why can't I do it? And I'm like, well, because when you were, 7, your parents, blah, 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 blah. And
but you have learned this in your meditation. Like,
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. And are they just like, blown, like what? You know that when I'm 7, what?
It is kind of like a fire hose. Like every single time when I get done, someone's always like, because I really talk the whole time.
It's like the most intensive It's like 10 years of therapy in 90 minutes. You're like, remember that time when you were 6 and you said this and you're like, oh, I blocked that out of my mind.
Yeah. And also like most of the time I don't ever get like that specific, but we can always typically pinpoint it to like, okay, let's talk about your relationship with your father or let's talk about your relationship with your mom and kind of go in from there. Cause I don't ever want to, I'm not trying to take someone through the most traumatic experience of their life.
Do you ever see or feel or hear things that are like not good about somebody and struggle with whether to share that or not? Like, does that ever happen?
Very rarely, because I'm setting the intention to be like, I want to connect with your highest timeline.
Okay.
So that's the difference between Akashic Records. This is why I'm obsessed with it and I love it, because I really do believe everything is coming from a place of love.
Okay.
If I were to just say, let's just do a psychic reading, open up a psychic sense,
that's different.
Which is different because I might find out things like, oh yeah, your husband might leave you or might cheat on you or something. Yeah. But I'm not here to disempower someone.
And I think a lot of people who feel like coming from a religious aspect point. And I think like even for myself, I've always said, I definitely believe in psychics. I believe in ghosts. I believe in like all these things exist. But there's always that fear of like you have to be careful of what you let in, right? Like how do you just let in the good and not have something bad seep in, which I think is what a lot of fear
comes from.
A lot of people have. But you're saying you have the ability to just the good come in.
You have the ability because God gives us free will.
And that's in the Akashic Records only, or could a psychic do that too?
Everybody. Literally everybody that taps into energy. If you're like, I want to know everything, then so be it. Typically people are going to, there's a lot of different ways people read and connect with energy. It's not just how I do it. There's tons of different ways. But I always tell people like God gives you free will. And that's why, even in the Bible, there's prophecy in the Bible, there's prophets in the Bible, there's angels, there's saints, there's all of these things that we're talking about. But over time, people don't really understand how it works and they're afraid they're going to let something in that they don't want to let in.
Yes.
And that's where the fear came from. And that's why I was raised being like, mediums, no.
Right. Like Poltergeist movie. Like I think all of that, Yeah.
And here's like, that is so not going to happen because you have the ability to set an intention and God gives you free will to do whatever you want with your energy.
Okay.
So if I'm saying I'm only connecting to the light and I am only connecting to the highest good of Jen, her highest timeline, her highest version of self.
Okay.
And so it is.
Right.
That's it.
You're only going to tell me good, positive things.
Right. Well,
or how to make myself better.
I'm only going to tell you what's going to empower you.
Okay.
It might not always be like the easiest pill to swallow because I'm going to be truthful.
Right.
But I'm never going to tell you anything that's going to make you leave me worrying someone's going to cheat on me, leave me. Like
Right. Like you're not going to say, I'm sorry, but your XYZ is going to die in 18 months because that's not empowering me.
No. And there are people out there that can do that.
Okay.
And it's not that it's coming from a place of darkness. It might just be very truthful, but I just feel like I'm always coming from a place of wanting to empower people.
Okay.
But if anybody's wanting to, you don't even have to want to tap into spirituality. But even if your house, if you're like, I don't want there to be like any ghosts in my house, or you get scared at night or whatever.
Yeah.
Say it out loud.
Okay. Question. So we had friends, I'm not going to say who they are, and they were telling us, this was just a couple of weeks ago, that they live in a very old house and that they felt like they had some sort of spirit in their house. And I was like, I would be like for sale sign, moving, like whatever. And they said, well, no, we think that it was a little girl. And I said, why? And they said, well, that just seems the safest. Like they've just made it up, like to make themselves feel, there's literally no rhyme or reason. And she said, well, I was talking to my friend and she just said, like, you need to say the words, like you need to leave. And I'm like, I would be so scared in that moment of, but I do, like, I've heard other people like saying, oh, I felt my house was haunted and I used those, what's the burning?
Sage or Palo Santo or something.
I was doing this and I was waving it all around and I think they're gone. And I'm like, I mean, I wouldn't even get to the store to buy the sage. I would just be like, I will be in a hotel till you sell this house. But okay, so are you saying that it is possible?
Yes.
So if anybody is listening, which I feel like the more I hear, people are like, oh, I think I have a ghost in my house. And I'm like, and you're just fine with that. Like it's somehow okay that they can get that ghost out of their house.
Yes.
By saying what?
But just listen, you do not have to call on someone like me to, I teach a lot of these practices on my podcast. It's like how to clear your house. I'll send you some of the stuff.
Okay.
But there is going to be energies that just come in and out and just exist. And it is what it is and it's okay. And if you're ever alone and you're like, oh, I don't know, I feel something kind of weird. I'm always like, I always call on can be a good example. I don't have to do this anymore, but this is when I was a beginner. Okay. So this is for my beginners. I would call on a loved one that has passed.
Okay.
So my grandmother, we called her Big Mom. I'd say Big Mom. I would like to invite you into my space because I know she's my guardian angel watching over me. And would you kindly carry any spirit over into the light or anywhere else, wherever they came from, whatever you want to say, into the light, cleanse the space. Okay. Because currently I would like to exist in my own energy field and I just want it to be just my space and peace and calm. And if there's any energy here that's not in the highest alignment with me, would you just kindly take them to the other side?
So what is it about saying the words out loud that would make a spirit leave?
Because we have free will and they have to respect our whatever we say. Most people don't know because they don't say anything. And the ghost is like, perfect. Right. I lived here first.
Oh my God.
And then I'm
getting like a nervous feeling just thinking about it.
It's okay. Yeah. I'm telling you, it's not scary. It usually is. It's like some old man that lived there his whole life. And he's like, I don't know, I'm lost.
Oh my God.
It's never.
She's like sitting. Okay. So here's a question.
Yeah.
If you were, well, for example, this studio is very old and has seen a lot of people come through the door.
It's not haunted.
Okay. First of all, thank God. Second of all, are you ever find yourself in a position, I'm just so curious about this. Like, would you ever find yourself in a position where you're having a conversation with me and you all of a sudden either see, if you were to see a ghost, spirit, whatever you call them, would you see them in an actual body form, how they looked, or would it more just be like an orb, light, blob?
So for me, I would just start to, that's one thing. I always tell people, I've trained, to turn this kind of on and off. So when I'm doing a reading for someone, I'm on. Okay. When I'm out in public, I want to be a human being. I want to be
like if you walk into a bar.
Yeah. My fiance was a football coach. We were like very normal people. Okay. I don't want to be like existing, seeing things or whatever. So I know how to close that down and just be in my own energy and just be Anna Grace. But for me, I would start to really intensely, sometimes it's like, I can feel when a spirit is trying to connect with me. Like if that was how when I first got into this work, because I didn't really know. Okay. But I could really intense. It was like I could feel someone trying to connect with me and really wanting to talk to me. And it's like I was starting to have this urge to tell someone things. But I'm like, I actually don't really believe in going around telling people, your grandma's behind you and she wants you to know, because they didn't consent to that. Right. I'm really big on people need to seek my information out. If not, I'm not an unsolicited advice. Okay,
you're not.
So, but I would start feeling like this very overwhelming, energy. Yeah. It's hard to describe because I always, I can hear it in this ear. I can sense it in this side of my body. I just know that something is beside me or someone's beside me or someone's wanting to talk to me. And I have I always say I have strict office hours. I don't allow anybody to communicate with me before I go to bed. I'm like, I'm trying to go to sleep. Okay. You're scared the heck out of me.
Because, oh my gosh, what was the lady, the Long Island medium with the blonde hair, Teresa? And she acts like people are just talking to her all day long in her head, 24/7.
And honestly, I probably could get there if I wanted to, but I don't.
Okay. So you would have to train to get there.
Yeah.
You could.
It's the same thing of if there's a random ghost in your house, you're like, hey, I'm so sorry. Respectfully, you've got to go somewhere else. Okay. And that's the law. That's how it works. If we were just existing and we had no free will or control over energy, we would all be a wreck, So it's very simple for, if you're like, hey, I would, I'm open to receiving messages right now. And so it is. Okay. And then I am. And so she's probably just open and on. I'm like, hey, I'm here with my stepson and my fiance. I want to go see a movie and be unbothered. Right. And I always say shields up. I just shield my whole body. Okay. I'm like, nope. Okay. I'm not interested in having, I don't need to know what your grandma wants to tell the guy behind me at the movie. I don't, that's not my work.
Is your fiance
Well, he was a very skeptic initially. The first 6 months we were together, I was like, yeah, I've kind of got this thing. It's kind of, it's interesting.
I might know everything about you.
Yeah. And what I did was I had a journal that I wrote down a couple of big life events for him. And I took a picture of it, screenshot it. So I timestamped it and emailed it to myself because I was like, I know he's smart. He's he would find a way around being somehow you knew or whatever, blah, blah, blah. So I wrote it all down. I was like, you're going to leave your job May 1st and you're going to end up going into a sales position that you're going to get through this friend. And sure enough, 6 months later, he had it. And I was like, yeah, I actually wrote that down in February. And he was like, stop. Are you reading my mind? How'd you do that? But now he's he doesn't know anything about the Akashic Records and he doesn't need to, and it's fine. But he deeply trusts my guidance, which is all that matters.
Yeah.
You know, he's, but
you said you have stopped drinking coffee. Is that right?
Yeah.
No coffee, no alcohol, no any sort of like mind altering drugs, like so different,
drug.
right? Like, could you ever have imagined yourself here?
No.
Right. Yes. I mean, are you just like, your mind just feels so open?
Yes, I'm very clear.
Yeah.
I'm very, very clear. My body feels completely different.
Yeah.
And that's the thing is that, you know, if you want to receive this high vibrational information and be able to hold that type of energy in your body, I couldn't be like a dumpster truck, you know, that I was before, because my body wouldn't be able to, I wouldn't be able to connect with that type of information because I was such at a lower vibration.
Okay, what is this vibration? Because I've heard you talk about this too, like with the vibrations. What is the vibration?
Well, I mean, I think we say it very flippantly in society. We're like, oh, that person's really, it's like when you walk into a room and you're like, oh, this is fun. Like the vibes are good. If you walk into a room and you're like, ooh, I'm getting really strange energy from people. Like we're constantly reading rooms, reading people's energy. We're reading like, oh, they look sad, they look upset, whatever. There's a vibe that's coming off of them. Because it's actually a vibration.
Oh.
On a scientific
So that's where the vibe
level.
Came from?
Yeah. It's like you're literally like a certain vibrational scale.
Right.
That every single person, and that's not even really like woo-woo. That's actually like scientifically proven because we're energetic beings. Yeah. And we have an electromagnetic field, which means we're experiencing there's a scale of vibrations, right? High vibration is like love, joy, bliss. Low is going to be like fear, anxiety, whatever. So in order, if you want to be a match for, you know, this positive information, this work that I do, you can't be at this.
Okay.
You're not
You've got to be open.
You've got to be open, right? And you have to have like a nice clear vessel to receive the information.
If somebody is listening and like, wow, I've kind of felt for the past 6 months, 10 years since I was born that I had this gift or something, but I've never really taken it further. Like, what would you recommend that they do if they're trying to kind of further or look more into, I guess, if it's kind of their thing?
Yeah. Well, I always tell people, if you ever think that you have a gift, you do.
Okay.
If there's ever been a time where you're like, I feel intuitive.
Yeah.
You are.
Yeah.
It's not crazy.
Okay.
We're all energetic beings. We are. That's scientifically proven. That is a fact. This isn't like from the Akashic Records. It's true. And so anytime someone feels like they have a spiritual gift, they do. It's wanting to come through. It's a part of them. They know, but they've been somehow conditioned or trained to believe otherwise.
Yes.
Right? But if you reconnect in with yourself, you know, the answers are inside of you. You know there's a gift there. And I always tell people, like, there is so much power in just being playful, just being curious. You don't have to decide you're going to be a psychic reader and read people's energy. That's like way too much pressure.
Yeah.
You could just start with something really simple, like go and trying Reiki, like finding a modality.
What is Reiki?
Reiki is where you're calling on life force energy and you're like moving it through the body.
Okay.
So it's a lot of hands-on.
Like massage?
No. It's like hovering over the body. It's like, you know, they always say Jesus laid hands.
Yes.
You know, it's all about like healing through the hands.
So it's healing. It's a healing practice.
Yes.
But someone has to be trained to do it?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm technically certified in Reiki, but let me correct that. You have to be trained if you want to ever offer it from a legal point to use the term Reiki.
Right.
Anybody can intuitively do Reiki. You can do it. If you just want to like play around. Yeah. If you want to get a friend and be like, okay, let's close our eyes and like both think of a number and see if we think of the same number. Like you can play in your gifts, and like, I felt this. I always tell people like angel cards, they're so fun. Like
what's an angel card?
Angel card or, you know, intention cards, daily intention cards. That was like the first place I started. I got unicorn cards because our mascot is the dancing unicorns. And so I had unicorn cards and they were like a daily intention that was like dance, like super playful.
Yeah.
It wasn't tarot. It was just like an intention card. And you like close your eyes, you connect with your higher self and you're like, okay, show me a number. And I would like see a random number in my head and I would draw out those cards and I would read the intention. I'd be like, wow, that's like an exact message or resonating with exactly where I am. Like just starting to play with the fact that you do have spiritual gifts and that it's not scary.
Yeah.
You have those gifts. They come from God. God gives us those gifts to connect with our intuition. Our intuitive voice is what everyone believes is God or God's plan or God's voice. Same thing with the Akashic Records. Angels, an extension of God, love, source. It's all coming, like when I say modality, it's just however people connect with whatever's coming from God.
Yeah.
Whatever makes you feel good is coming from God.
Why do you think the term psychic or intuitive or whatever gets such a bad rap? Not from everybody, but or has, at least in the past.
Yeah. I think especially, I mean, the word psychic or witch, which is a really big one, which I always tell people, witch means a wise woman.
Okay.
Which is literally
But
like
it has such a negative
connotation because I mean there was literally like the Salem witch trials.
Yes.
And if you which now I've studied and read, it's like women who collect herbs and were making tinctures.
Yeah.
They were healers.
Yeah.
And they burned them at the stake because they're like, we don't know what this otherworldly power is. They didn't understand it and they were afraid of it and wanted to shut it down.
Yeah.
So I think there is a lot of people, also even psychics, have gotten kind of like a really cheesy like 1-800 hotline vibe, which is why I actually never say like I'm psychic. I always say I'm a clairvoyant medium because it invites people in to be curious because they typically are like, oh, what is that? Versus psychic, they've got their own programming around what the word means to them, and that's okay.
Yeah.
But it's another one that maybe someone in your life or a collective of people or culturally has condemned that practice. And so you just have also, because it's just what you've known.
It's what you've known.
But if you actually check in with yourself and be like, do I actually know anything about what they do? Do I actually know anything? You'd be surprised. Be like, no.
Right.
I mean, it was like me. I was like, what psychic hurt me? No one.
Yeah. But it's just how you grew up.
Yeah, it was just how I grew up.
Well, and I think it is really interesting how you talk about like your mind having to be free of all these numbing devices and being open. And I had said this to you that it really struck me when you were talking about the story of, and I don't want to butcher it, so I'm going to ask you to tell it or share it, about like the flower with the essence and the alcohol, because it really to me is very different than what most people, like, you hear the words, it's like drunk man's words or a sober man's thoughts or something like that. But, almost like if somebody drinks, you see their true self. But can you tell what that?
Yeah. So
interesting.
There's levels with alcohol. And I'm not someone that's going to sit here and say nobody should ever drink. It's bad, whatever. I'm very much so like whatever is serving you. There was just a time and a place in my life where alcohol was no longer serving me. Yeah. It was something that I got way too comfortable reaching for. And so I decided to step away and just reevaluate my relationship, and maybe someday I'll dabble. Yeah. But I think there is truth to what you're saying about alcohol instills a certain level of confidence in us at a certain level. Yeah. But on an energetic perspective, which is how I started to see everything once I had this new lens where I was like, oh, this is actually scary in a way, because I was using alcohol with zero intention. Okay. So this is always what I tell people. The story that I'm about to tell you is not meant to scare you. It's meant to make you aware that if you're intentional with how you're going out and drinking, if you're like going to have a social, like a beautiful wedding, champagne, whatever, great. Yeah. But if you're like, I'm going to the bar to drink because I've had a terrible day and I'm trying to black out, you're signaling to your body. So how we use alcohol, like literally we're talking about flower tinctures and extractions, we will put it in like flowers to extract their essence. So alcohol, which they say in Arabic is alcohol, which translates to body eating spirit, which means that as we overdo it with alcohol or start to consume alcohol, we're literally extracting part of our soul's essence, allowing our bodies to become these sort of open vehicles. I mean, think about the amount of times that I've told people like, think about the time you blacked out and you're like, I don't know why I did that. Right. Why did I do that? I'm like, it wasn't you.
Well, and a lot of people think that was the real me. Or somebody else thinks, well, that was the real him. Have you ever seen them drink? That's the real him.
Yeah, no, they shouldn't be drinking because they're just literally allowing themselves to be susceptible to any energy. Yeah,
they're just like it takes too much alcohol. It's taking the best parts of you. It's not showing you the real you.
Right. Yeah. It's extracting part of your, your soul's essence, your energy, because there's also a part of the body that like it is poison. Yeah. Like I said, a little bit's okay, but it's when you're constantly overdoing it, it is this poison. And our soul is like, it's toxic in here. I don't want to be in here. I'm going to extract from the situation. Well, now you've got a car flying down the highway with no driver. Yeah. So like, that's when, of course, we're allowing all the energy of the bar to affect us, to do something, to say something, to cheat on our partner, to do something that we're like, I would never do that. Right. I'm like, well, yeah, because you completely abandoned your ship here. And that's why I always tell people it's nothing to be afraid of, but it's something to be aware of, that all you have to do is to have intention with alcohol. If your intention is like, I want to have a really beautiful, Jen and I are
Right.
we're going to
have a glass of wine.
Yeah, we're going
Yes.
to have a glass of wine. We're going to connect. We're going to get to know each other. It's going to be like a really loving, beautiful, positive experience versus every experience and interaction with alcohol is something where you want to numb or escape. Like, think about it. I want to escape this situation.
Yeah.
You're literally inviting your energy to just like come out of your body.
And then you wake up the next day and you feel even worse about yourself.
Yeah. And you're embarrassed and you don't know what you've done or how you've acted or behaved. It's because there was just, no intention there. And I think it's just something people should be aware of and just practice. Like, okay, how am I actually using alcohol?
Right. Even if you are not looking to tap into your psychic, intuitive abilities, like just to make decisions in general.
It's a substance.
Yeah. Okay.
It's a substance. You know, we've just normalized it so much that, we all just reach for a drink. We all just reach for a drink. Yeah, but let's also just be like aware of why we're constantly reaching, or at least like let's set an intention around it. And this is just anyone.
Tell everybody about your retreats that you're doing, because I thought they were so just fun, really.
I'm really excited. So we did our first retreat in Costa Rica, and that's definitely like the forward momentum of AG University is because, so my wait list booked out. We booked every spot for 2 years.
For the retreats?
No, just for my one-on-ones.
Oh, okay.
So we were like, okay, well, how can we start to scale this so that we can connect with more people, which is also what I've always wanted to do is events. And we did a week in Costa Rica, and we did a lot of what I always tell people is like somatic practices, which is what I love. So we did like dance practices.
Okay. Because I saw that on your Instagram.
I believe that women traditionally and through society don't know how to express anger.
Okay.
And they say that women are the 75% more likely to get an autoimmune disorder or disease illness than men, because men actually are pretty good at expressing anger.
Physical anger.
Women, we've been taught to be cute, to be pretty.
Quiet.
To be, or to not really be too expressive because then you don't want to be bitchy or rude. And we always are like, oh, I don't want to be like that. I want to be palatable.
Like if you're going to be emotional, just cry.
Right. Yeah. But there is a lot of, I always tell people it's called feminine rage. And anytime I always say that term, everyone's like, it really does something to me.
Oh, yeah. And my kids are like, oh, mom's raging. I'm like, this is not me raging.
Yeah.
And they're like, you look like you're raging.
Yeah, but I always tell people it's actually good. It's good to have.
To get it out.
It's good to have some of those emotions, but most of the time we just don't know how to express them.
So are you doing that on these retreats?
Yes.
Are you just like beating the crap out of each other on the beach?
We do a lot of... I'm like, so we're going to spar. We're all going to slap fight each other. No, but I
in the boxing ring.
We could.
It's a thing.
But I'm into it. Like I had a. It was like last year, where I really started to realize that I was like, I have a lot of pent up emotion because 10 years of my life I was completely numb from every emotion.
Yes, right.
I was just taking a pill, numb. Everything was suppressed. And everything came up. It was like right before I turned 30. I was like, I'm angry. Yeah. Austin's like, me? I'm like, no, just in general. I have some emotion that's stuck in my body and I don't know what it is. And I tell people, I'm like, that trapped emotion in your body, it's going to physically manifest as weight, energetic protection. Yeah. Quite literally trying to protect your body from something outside of you.
Wow. Like physical, like pounds.
Physical pounds.
Wow.
Like if you're in an abusive relationship, your body's going to start to physically create a barrier between you and the person next to you to protect you.
Yeah.
Like there is so much that goes into like when people are hard on themselves for whatever's going on in their health, I'm like, listen, you have something in your body that it's just trying to send you a signal. Please process this. Please get out of this situation, this job that you hate. These health crises are usually the best thing that ever happened. But if we don't express our emotions, it oftentimes will manifest as illness. Yeah. And rage is one. I mean, it literally will take over our entire liver. And that's based off of Chinese medicine practices, is the liver stores a lot of anger and rage. And when our liver slows down, that's just like a breeding ground for, autoimmune responses and all kinds of things.
Have you heard of the Rage Room in Nashville?
No, but I would love to go.
Yes, you literally just go in and like just break stuff with like mallets, and you can buy like an old VCR. You can buy an old stereo. It's just like people's old crap that they sell. It's like a garage sale, but there's different rooms. And when you go in, you like rent the room. You get goggles and a mallet, and then you can buy items to destroy.
That's perfect.
Yeah.
I think that's great.
Yeah.
I think people need a physical outlet.
Yes.
It's more than just like meditating on it and being like, I'm going to experience little rage. It's like, no, we're meant to really we did like a stomping, like a lot of like actual like true somatic work.
Okay.
Which somatic is just like experience, like physically releasing things from the body. Like there's physical movement involved. And we do like, I always encourage people to do primal screaming, which is just like going out in the middle of nowhere.
And screaming.
Yeah. Because a lot of times people like scream into a pillow and I'm like, no, but so you're still muffling it.
Right.
Like I want you to actually
like an actual scream.
I want you to scream because like the scream actually alters like our whole entire body.
Okay, like your nervous system.
It's how you regulate your nervous system.
Yeah.
At the core, everything I teach is I teach 1,000 different ways for people to regulate their nervous system.
Okay.
Because if your nervous system is regulated and we can get you back into this place of being centered and balanced, all of these random mystery illnesses and things that we're diagnosed with these days, they're gone.
And I think it's in like, especially like for your podcast and your Instagram feed and the AG University, it's like someone doesn't have to follow you or be part of that page necessarily because they're looking to have their akashic records read or looking to tap into their own psychic abilities. Like you just do a great job of women being in tune and in touch with their own feelings, what's going on in their own bodies, which I think especially like, I think your generation is better at it, but like my generation, I think for sure grew up where none of that was okay. Like,
well, you just didn't have any tools.
No.
You just didn't know.
You didn't know what you're supposed to, you were just supposed to just keep it all
together.
Keep it all inside and keep it all together.
Yeah.
So,
and then we wonder why later in life we're all about to explode.
Right.
Or we have cancer.
Yeah.
It's like one of those two things. And that's the thing I always tell people. Oftentimes people will come to me like, I've never heard of the Akashic Records. I have no idea what you're doing. I don't even know, but I'm like, I'm curious or I'm drawn to this or I feel for some reason called to be here. I'm like, great. At the core, all I'm teaching you is how to go within, how to listen to yourself and how to regulate your nervous system. Okay. You don't have to wake up one day and want to be a medium. You can great.
Right.
I would love for that for you.
New podcast. I'm a medium.
Yeah. Jen
has become a medium.
Yeah. I mean, you just never know. But also it doesn't, in order for you to connect with your higher self, your soul's purpose, all of these things, in order for you to do the thing that you're here to do, and everybody has a purpose. Yeah. I'm positive. I know that for an absolute fact. That was another near-death experience takeaway. Yeah. Everybody has a purpose. And that's when I realized how far away I was from mine. If you can get your nervous system regulated and get like the anxiety, all of the things, then that is how you're actually going to be able to hear the next steps, to like receive the guidance, to know where to go, to know what to do. Yeah. And then you can carry the information. Like you can be in your soul's purpose when you're like calm. You're not like an anxious mess. Yeah. And all of it goes back to regulating your nervous system.
I loved how I heard you say about the regulating your nervous system, going on a walk.
Yes.
Without your phone and your headphones. And I actually heard you say that. And then just when I walk my dog, I always take my phone because of course I'm like, what if somebody needs me? What if it's an emergency? What if I need to check Instagram on the next blog or something like that? And of course there's never an emergency. No one ever needs me. I probably am not checking it, but it's still, I'm aware it's in my phone or I'm like listening to music. But will you tell everyone what you said about your nervous system and walking?
Well, the number one thing that I always tell people is great is that birds chirping actually regulates our nervous system because based off of nature, and we are all part of nature, whether we're like aware or not, but when birds chirp, they actually chirp when there's no danger present. So our bodies via evolutionary times, we know we can relax when birds are chirping. There's no danger present. And so that's a really good way to regulate your nervous system is literally going on a walk and just listening to nature.
Yeah. Without your phone, without your music.
Without your phone, without your music. And I'm really big on clarity walks. I feel you can get a ton of information. My two things are always journaling, write it down, write about it and zoom out, or clarity walks. But I always say, if you are needing intuitive guidance, from your higher self, whatever word you believe in, God, Jesus, whatever word, and every single day you go on walks and you plug your ears, you literally are signaling, I'm plugging my ears and I'm listening to music and I'm like flooding my thoughts. Nothing can come in. Right. You can't get any intuitive feelings or thoughts when you're just plugged in and looking at a screen. Like quite literally open your ears to get some guidance.
Right. I think sometimes people don't like to be alone with their own thoughts.
You're right. But that's like the more that you can get comfortable being alone with your own thoughts, the more that you can tune in to like, okay, I actually know what it is that I'm supposed to do, or I actually know why I'm doing this or what I like. Yeah. I mean, for me, I go on walks being like, what do I want to create today? What sounds fun to me? What do I want to create? What do I want to share with the world? I don't just like walk around being like, what do people need to hear? Yes, there is that too.
Yeah. But it's more like, what do I need today?
Yeah. But like also what sounds fun to me? Right. If you're a creator and you have to create every single day, you've got to create for you too. It has to be something you enjoy.
Yeah, or you'll burn out.
You will.
Yeah.
If you're constantly creating for other people because you're putting an expectation or you need them to validate your work in some type of way. I just show up and I'm like, well, this is what I'm going through and this is what I've learned and this is what's working for me and this is what's fun for me.
Yeah. Wow. All right. You've given us a lot to think about.
I know.
Okay. So tell people where they can find you on Instagram.
Yes.
At Anna Grace Newell.
Yes.
And at AG University.
At AG University Podcast.
AG University Podcast is the handle. Okay. And we'll put it all up. And then anywhere you listen to podcasts. Is it on YouTube, your podcast?
Yeah.
Okay. So it's on YouTube. Okay.
Yeah.
And you sometimes do it alone and you sometimes have guests.
Yes.
Right? Okay. How many episodes have you done? Do you even know now?
I think I just put out my 76th.
Okay. Wow. Is it once a week?
Yeah.
Wow.
There was a moment where I was doing it twice a week, but I went back to once a week. Yeah, every Wednesday.
Good for you.
We go live every Wednesday morning at 5 a.m. And if you're ever interested in doing any in-person events or retreats or any of the fun, powerful work that we're doing at AG University, join my newsletter. It's free. Yay. It's in my bio. And I won't spam you.
Well, I'm so excited to have you here. And this weekend you're here for your no, not your bachelorette party.
My bridal party. My bridal shower.
I keep calling it your bachelorette party.
It's
which
okay.
I don't know why.
It's like
because you're in Nashville. I'm like, oh, you must be here for a bachelorette party.
I know.
You're for your bridal shower.
Yeah.
Which is, when are you getting married?
I'm not telling you. Anyway. No, sorry.
Is it going to be like are you going to just get married and then let everybody know it's done?
I'm not telling everyone the date because when they find out the location, everyone knows where it is, but they don't know yet. I haven't told them. So I don't want anyone to come.
So you're going to tell them, like you're not having anyone at the wedding?
No. I mean, my friends. I mean, like I don't want to tell
people.
The internet.
Okay.
Yeah,
gotcha.
yeah.
Okay. So you're going to just surprise. Okay.
It's in the fall.
You're going to surprise people after it's done.
Well, probably like day of.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll be like, ta-da! Here we are. Yay. I know.
Well, that's exciting. All right. Well, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for
maybe
having
we'll
me.
have you back one day.
I would love that.
Okay. Thanks, Anna Grace.
Thank you.
Okay.